What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel for the first Ask Me Anything episode of the 2025 NHL offseason. As always, when it comes to these videos, huge shout out to everyone who left a question on the post. Even if your comment isn't featured in this video, just know I read them all, and I appreciate all of you guys. And I also want to say a huge thanks because we just recently hit 83,000 subscribers. It's been a great couple of months for the channel, so thank you guys for that. If this is your first time checking out the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button because we are now on the road to 84,000. And with that all being said, let's go ahead and start off with the first question from Quinton, who says, who are your three biggest losers of this year's free agency? The first team that comes to mind is definitely the LA Kings. You lose a guy like Gavrikov, who was your most important defenseman this past season, as Drew Doughty was out for the majority of the season, and in an attempt to try and replenish the blue line after trading Spence and losing Gavrikov to free agency, Ken Holland goes out and signs 33-year-old Brian Dumoulin to a 3-year deal, and signs Cody Ceci to a 4-year deal with a cap of $4.5 million per season, making Cody Ceci the second highest paid defenseman on the LA Kings behind Drew Doughty. It's pretty crazy to think that the LA Kings are going to be paying Cody Ceci and Brian Dumoulin more per season than what Gavrikov is making per season in New York. I like the fact that they brought back Kuzmenko on a 1-year deal, and Armia should be a solid bottom 6 two-way winger and a good penalty killer for them. But at the end of the day, on paper at least, I think the Kings are a worse team right now than they were, say, at the start of this past season. And for a team that has now lost in the first round to the same team in 4 consecutive years, that's not good, and I can't imagine it inspires very much confidence within the LA Kings fan base. To say that I'm worried about the future of this team with Ken Holland at the helm would be an understatement. Another team that I would label as one of my 3 biggest losers of free agency is the Boston Bruins. The same team that wouldn't give Brad Marchand the kind of contract he was looking for to make him a Bruin for life goes out and gives a 4th liner in Tanner Jeannot a 5-year deal in free agency. And the last team I'll mention as one of my biggest losers of free agency is actually the Winnipeg Jets. Losing Nikolai Ehlers is definitely a massive blow to their top 6, and even though the Jets had a ton of cap space coming into free agency, and they still do, I wasn't really expecting them to make a big splash and land a big fish to try and replace Ehlers in the top 6, because as we all know, the Jets are a team who struggle to attract free agents. They were able to bring in some veterans who could end up being solid depth pieces like Taves, Nyquist, and Pearson, but ultimately they got older, they got slower, they got worse. If the only other big moves they make for the remainder of the offseason are re-signing their big RFAs like Velarde and Sandberg, and they don't make a big splash, say for an example in the trade market, I just don't think I'm going to have a whole lot of confidence in them being a top-tier contender in the Western Conference again next season. This next question comes from Ask a Screenwriter, who says, will Buffalo trade Bowen Byram, and if so, what will the return be, and how much will Byram end up making? When it comes to Byram, I don't think it's a matter of if he's going to be traded, I think it's a matter of when. As far as what the return could look like for Buffalo and what Byram's next contract will look like, considering what the Rangers were able to get for Keandre Miller, I think the return for Buffalo could end up being huge. Now, it's been reported that Kevin Adams isn't looking for futures in return for Byram. He wants players that can come in and help right away. The Blues are a team that reportedly have a lot of interest in Bowen Byram, and there's been a lot of talk about the Blues potentially looking to move Jordan Kyrou. In this case, I think Buffalo would have to give up more than just Byram because I think Kyrou is the better and more valuable player of the two, but I do wonder if a trade centered around those 2 players would work for the Blues and Sabres. In terms of what Byram's next contract will look like, again referencing the Keandre Miller sign and trade to Carolina, I feel like we were all pretty surprised by how big Miller's extension with the Hurricanes ended up being, and I think that's going to be the case again when Byram signs an extension wherever it ends up being. It's been reported that his asking price is $9 million per season. I can't see him getting that, but probably not much less. I feel like he'll end up getting something in the range of $7.5 to $8.5 million per season on his next deal. Moving on now, this next question comes from Ninja TV, who says, one pro and one con from the new CBA agreement. I'm seeing a lot of good, but one thing I don't like, and it has to do with the new max term. So actually, a couple of things I like. Dress codes being abolished, I think that is long overdue. In my opinion, dress codes are stupid. Let the players express themselves, let them dress how they want to. Obviously, the extension of the NHL's commitment to Olympic participation through 2030 is good. And I'm actually on the other side of the fence as you are about the new max term thing. So for those of you who don't know, the NHL is going to be shortening max term contracts, capped at 7 years for a player re-signing with his club and 6 years if they re-sign with another team. Obviously, it's going to take a long time before that really starts to have an impact, but eventually it's going to lead to players being in a contract year more often, and when star players are in a contract year, it's exciting. It can lead to massive trades. It can lead to us seeing superstar players available in free agency more often. I like that. Also love that they're going to be shortening the preseason. That's another thing that is long overdue. So there's 4 things I like. I know you only asked for 1 pro and 1 con, but I couldn't really pick just one out of those 4. And if I had to pick one thing that I'm not a huge fan of, honestly, it would have to be the 84 game regular season. I know a lot of old school fans are going to hate this idea, but I would have preferred them keep the regular season at 82 games, but still shorten the preseason. But instead of having 2 extra games during the regular season, let's have a play-in tournament. I think the play-in tournament has done wonders for making the end of the NBA regular season a lot more exciting, and I know the NHL doesn't really have this problem now because for the most part this offseason pretty much every team in the league was trying to get better with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 teams, but there have been times throughout history where tanking has been an issue in the NHL, and I think implementing something like a play-in tournament helps prevent that because it encourages teams to try and stay in the playoff hunt as long as they can right up until the end of the regular season, because even if you're 1 or 2 spots out, you can play your way in through the play-in tournament. So those are my pros and 1 con of the new CBA. As a whole, I give it a thumbs up. There's definitely a lot more to like in it than there is to dislike in my opinion. Moving on now to the next question. This one comes from Nicholas, who says, huge ad for the Canes getting Ehlers. Now they need a 2C. It seems like 2C are super hard to come by now. Who would be the best fit / should the Canes go for? McTavish, Kadri. I think for a team like Carolina, it definitely makes sense for them to try and target a long-term fix at that position as opposed to getting someone who would maybe just be a 1 or 2 year rental. So somebody like McTavish would be perfect, but I'm really not buying any of the McTavish trade talk. I think Anaheim would be silly to move on from him, seeing as though the Hurricanes already went out and used some valuable trade assets to bring in Keandre Miller. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they try and look internally to fill that number 2 center position. Maybe you give a guy like Logan Stankoven the opportunity to take the ball and run with it. He was drafted as a center. He may be a bit undersized, but he's obviously got a ton of skill, and he's a hardworking guy. He's a tenacious player who already has a pretty responsible 2-way game. If the Hurricanes really put in the effort over the summer to try and improve his face-off abilities, I think they'd be much better off starting the season with him at that number 2 center position over Kotkaniemi if they aren't able to land somebody in a trade. Moving on now to the next question. This one comes from Barzell13, who says, which signing do you think was a sneaky valuable move? For example, a signing that not many people have been talking about, but you think is an underrated move. Even though I labeled this team as one of my biggest losers of free agency so far, I do really think the Kings bringing back Kuzmenko on a 1-year deal is going to turn out to be a steal for them. They brought him in at the trade deadline this past season, and he was a very good fit on their top line. He was very productive to finish out the regular season, and he was very productive in the playoffs as well. If he can stay healthy and stick on the Kings' top line for the full season, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up finishing next season with numbers similar to the ones that he put up as a rookie with the Canucks. This next question comes from It's Mini Perico. Hopefully I said your name right. Do you think the Bruins have a chance of getting back in the playoffs? I don't think Sweeney made the improvements needed to the roster to where they can compete. I'm right there with you. I can't see the Bruins getting back into the playoffs next season. I mean, they were bad this past season, and they still had guys like Marchand, Carlo, and Trent Frederick up until the trade deadline. Next season is going to be a full season without any of those guys, and their 2 real big, in quotations, big off-season additions were Tanner Jeannot and Victor Arvidsson so far. I honestly feel like it would take a miracle for this team to get back into the playoffs next season. I think a lot would have to go right. Jeremy Swayman would probably have to play like a Vezina candidate. Elias Lindholm would have to get back to being one of the better 2-way first-line centers in the league. And I also think they need at least a couple of young guys to really step up and break out into bigger roles like Fraser Minton and Matthew Poitras. And on top of all that, they'd also need one of the 5 teams who made the playoffs in the Atlantic Division this past season to take a big step back. Like I said, a lot would have to go right for this Bruins team to get back into the playoffs next season, and I just don't see it happening. This next question comes from NQ Productions, who says, what team will make the biggest improvement from last year to the 2025-26 season? If you mean what team do I think will have the biggest improvement in terms of their point totals, I'm honestly going to go with the Nashville Predators. They were abysmal this past season, finishing with just 68 points. I really just can't see them being that bad again. I feel like there's got to be some positive regression there. The blue line on paper also looks a lot better after bringing in guys like Hag and Perbix. I could see a world where Nashville is an 88-point team next season, which still wouldn't be enough to get them into the playoffs, but it would be a 20-point improvement from their 68-point finish this past season, which I feel like would be pretty hard to beat. This next question comes from sportskid_shorts, who says, do you think the Detroit Red Wings are losers or winners of free agency so far? I'm going to say neither. I think they fall somewhere in between. In his recent presser, Steve Yzerman literally said that there were free agents that they were going to have interest in, big name guys that he just didn't even get a chance to talk to because they either re-signed with their former team before free agency opened, or in the case of Mitch Marner, were traded. And there's not really much you can do about that. Just because the Red Wings weren't able to land one of those big top free agents, I'm glad Yzerman didn't just go and panic and start throwing a bunch of money and huge contracts at middle of the lineup players, because he's already done too much of that throughout this rebuild with guys like Kopp, Confer, Sherratt, Hall, Tarasenko, the list goes on. He made some decent depth signings and didn't really hinder the Red Wings' cap flexibility moving forward. Obviously, it's still very early and a lot of guys are going to end up re-signing with their team before free agency opens next year, but there's a chance next year's free agency class could be an all-timer, so I don't think the Red Wings not going on a big spending spree in this year's free agency is really the end of the world at all. And now finally, finishing up this episode of the Ask Me Anything series with a question from Justin Coleman, who says, the New Jersey Devils have a big logjam on defense with almost all of their defensemen having some sort of no movement clause. Seamus Casey seems ready to make the jump to the NHL, but there isn't much room. Furthermore, Dougie Hamilton's name is in trade talks, has a 10-team trade list to try and free up cap space and space on the back end. Who do you think will get the short end of the stick, or what do you think gives in order to make things work? You're definitely right about there being a logjam on the Devils' blue line. I think Simon Nemec is likely going to be looking for a bigger role sooner rather than later. And I also agree with you that Seamus Casey is probably ready for a full-time role in the NHL at this point. And with both Nemec and Casey playing on the right side and also already having Brett Pesce on the right side and him having a full no-trade clause, I do think ultimately Dougie Hamilton is going to be the player who gets the short end of the stick and ends up being moved, which probably wouldn't be the easiest thing to do given Hamilton's age, his injury history, and the fact that he has 3 more years left at a cap of $9 million per season. But you have to imagine the Devils would love to be able to move on from that contract somehow, especially because they still have to pay Luke Hughes, who is currently an RFA. So that is going to wrap up this episode of the Ask Me Anything series. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, huge shout out to everyone who sent in a question. You guys all make these interactive videos so much fun for me to make. If you made it all this way to the end of the video and you ended up enjoying yourself, please remember to leave a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does help out the videos a ton. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you all again soon.